Welcome back to the Present Fathers Podcast. This is a special episode where we will be interviewing one of our own, and today we are interviewing Brandon Blinson. So Brandon is one of our esteemed members. We joke he is the Jordan Peterson of the group. He's the philosopher, the wise one. So we're very excited to share his story with you. There's a lot of relatable moments in his life where he's overcome different struggles and challenges, and we hope that you can learn from his experience. So this is part one of his story. I know you're going to love it, and I'd love for you guys to comment with your favorite parts from his story. In addition to that, please do us a massive favor. Go to your favorite platform, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple, etc., and leave us a review. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment. And if there's something that you want to see us discuss in the future, a topic or a specific guest you'd like to have on, please let us know in the comments, and we will do our best to facilitate that. With that said, enough talk. We're going to get into the episode, and hope that you really enjoy Brandon Blinson's story. Welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. This is the show that focuses on climbing the mountain of fatherhood together. We believe that dads matter. That's why this show is for you. So gear up, dads. Get ready. It's time to start climbing. Brandon Blinson, welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. It is such a privilege to have you as our guest tonight. How are you?
Excited to be here. First podcast ever, right?
First podcast ever, yeah, man. It's that's a joke for those listening. Brandon, so as we're going through our own stories, tonight is Brandon. So we will be highlighting Brandon Blinson, the podcast philosopher, our own Jordan Peterson Light 2.0, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, Brandon, we are excited to learn from your story. And before we begin, I just want to set for the audience, because maybe they don't really know the real you yet. But for those of us on the podcast who are your close friends, you have been a man who has taught us so much. You push us to improve ourselves in the spiritual realm, our minds to embrace new ideas. And so you're just a man who has an immense hunger for knowledge and learning, self-improvement. And that is definitely something that has washed over the rest of the guys on the podcast. And I just want to affirm you in that publicly here on this before we start your story. So let's start from the beginning. You are obviously a twin brother. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your early childhood and kind of upbringing and family dynamics, and we'll move from there.
Yeah, man, I had a fantastic childhood. I want to start off by saying that. 3 brothers, 2 wonderful parents, grandparents, both together. Parents were both together, still together. My grandparents just celebrated their 65th. My parents, their 45th. So loyalty is definitely something that was ingrained into our family. I was the second oldest, right, like 15 seconds behind my twin brother Justin. And so we were kind of the pioneers, the experimental children, where the parents learned, all the things. And yeah,
I can relate.
It was an amazing childhood. So much so that being an adult was hard at first because I had it so good, right? And so I have a different path than a lot of people because I was very blessed. But external environmental things excluded, I had a lot of internal turmoil stemming from ADHD and just some social misgivings, I guess you could say. So, there was a lot of struggle for me in other areas. But yeah, I mean, in general, my childhood was amazing. It was very strange, but exciting being a twin because you always got called your brother's name and you just had to be used to it, right? You just had to respond to 2 names, right? And then, of course, when he's kind of a blabbermouth and he likes to get in fights. And so like people would come up to me trying to swing on me in high school. And it's not, like, hey, I'm not Justin. I'm Brandon. I'm the one that lays low and just focuses on school, right? So I had to deal with a lot of that. But, so childhood was good. I think the biggest thing for me was that I was just constantly wanting to be like in solitude by myself and reading and figuring things out, like pulling things apart and putting them back together and see how they worked. And like, I just had this insatiable hunger for everything. Like anything that was around me, I just wanted to pick it up. And I think that's part of the ADHD thing, right? But it's definitely something that just kept me going through my childhood, for sure.
Okay, so tell us a
Sure.
little bit more about like, what was your family culture like? Was it, like
Yeah.
mine was super intense. So what was your like, and then
Yeah.
within the dynamic of having so many brothers in the same household, like, what were the things that kind of kept Brandon going in the midst of all
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So, first part, the environment. We screamed a lot. A lot of like we just yelled and bickered and fought. We loved hard, but we fought hard, right? Um, I think both my parents, and I love them to death, but I don't think either one of them had a good handle on emotional regulation when it came to correcting kids. Like I just remember anytime I got in trouble, my parents would scream and then spank. And I kind of built up a wall where I walked on eggshells, um, so that I wasn't the one that got yelled at or hurt, right? My brothers were always the ones. And thankfully, Justin was the one that opened his mouth the most. So he kind of was always on the radar and I wasn't. I'm just being real. I love you, Justin, but you never kept that mouth shut. But yeah, so but here's the crazy thing: we were very forgiving. So like we would have a knockout, drag out argument where we would scream at each other, and there'd be a lot of drama, as they say. But the next morning we would wake up and everybody was good. Everybody loved each other, and sometimes we would talk about it. Or at least I try to, and that would drive everybody crazy. But everybody else just kind of wanted to just keep it under the rug and not worry about it. So, and I was okay with that. Less drama was less drama, right? So, it shaped me a lot though, because like my dad, man, he was so present when we were kids, but to provide for us, he had to be gone Monday through Friday. So, 75, 80% of my childhood was without my dad, even though I had a dad and he was a great dad. And, it was really hard for him to be emotionally present because of the trauma and the tragedy that he had in his life. He had his father, and we'll get into this more when I interview him, but his father passed away in front of him when he was 9. He was an alcoholic and abusive. His mom was suicidal, and there's a lot of things there, but yeah, so he had a lot of trauma, and so for him, he's very happy-go-lucky, and nothing kind of really bothered him. But like, he never really got deep and serious with things. And I'm the opposite. Like, I'm serious and deep about everything, as y'all know. So, like, I would ask deep questions, and he'd give me a very generalized answer, right? And
Okay.
so that was tough for me.
And when you say it was tough sorry to cut you off, but when you say it's
Sure.
tough for you, like, can you unpack that a little bit more? What did that mean? Like, and what did you do to kind of cope with that, I guess?
Yeah, so for me, quality connection is like being very intellectually curious and diving deep into like having deep, meaningful conversations. Like I am a person that cannot stand surface level conversation. Like I am I'm decent at it, but like I'm just so pushed off by it. Like people that just have 100 friends that they barely have any depth with. I can't stand that. I would rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. And so quality over quantity was always kind of my thing. And so I wanted quality with my dad, but it was really hard with 3 other brothers and my mom needing him, and him being pulled in all these different directions on the weekend, playing catch up from being gone Monday through Friday. So it was like the connection emotionally, as much as I wanted it, wasn't there. And so I just kind of had this lone wolf solitude mentality, right? I built that up and said, I fix my own problems. And so, as an adult, one of the hardest things for me to get through was the realization that when I isolate because of an issue in my life, which is dangerous, especially with somebody with anxiety and who has had depression like myself, I isolate when things get hard, and I'm not supposed to isolate, right? And the reason being is because when I was a kid, I had to solve my own problems by myself. And that was a tough thing for me to accept for a while. But eventually, through a lot of just really digging deep through it, I did. And it was something that made me more mentally and physically stronger, right? So it was a good and a bad thing. It's, everything, like suffering in general is a double-edged sword, but it was such a necessary thing, right? Because it prepares us for the path that we have to forge, in the future, right? So yeah, so with my dad, it was tough. And then with my mom, bless it, she took care of 4 boys, just 4 wild ADHD boys, right? And so she's exhausted all the time, and she lost her temper a lot. She's a redhead and she's very spirited. So, it was easy for her. And so, the connection there was nurture, sure. But when I wanted to have a conversation, it was really tough to not have her shut down or just get angry, right? Especially if it was something I wanted to address. And so for me, that was tough. But yeah, I mean, I turned to other things, right? Like learning and music and cars and different stuff.
Yeah, I know you kind of talked about it before, even on the podcast, how you kind of just go up in your room and read books and that kind of stuff. So is that because you're naturally introverted, or was it more of kind of just like a survival mechanism in a sense for you to kind of, there's all this going on, this is how I can kind of keep myself safe from it, I guess?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of both. Because, okay, so a little background, my parents made me take like IQ tests, and I was having to do the Mensa program and all that stuff because I was in the 150s. And so I was a very intelligent person with a very, very sharp and keen memory. And like I read something, I remembered it. I learned something, I remembered it. I can tell you stuff from when I was a kid, like vividly, right? And so like one of the things my parents did was they saw that I had a love for learning and reading. They literally bought me encyclopedias, and I'm not kidding. I literally read it from A to F the first year, like everything. And I would just run around spitting useless facts and knowledge to my parents, and they would laugh and they would, reward me for it. But it was just something that, again, an insatiable hunger for that, right? And so
yeah. Fun fact: ChatGPT, all the knowledge in it is actually from Brandon Blinson. It's just out of his brain.
No,
so that's
no, but so
that's why it's wrong a lot.
That's pretty good. I'm going to have to use that. But no, so as far as going back to my peers, it was really hard for me to connect with my peers socially because they wanted to do basketball and all this stuff, and I wanted to talk about like social psychology and like things I was reading, like things that were much more out of the scope of somebody my age should have been reading and thinking about. And like, it was just things that just constantly piqued my curiosity. Right. And so, there was a disconnect, a lot of attachment disorder there, but it's okay. And, it pushed me and drove me to just be smart. Right. And just to try to push myself. And so I did. That's what I did all the way up into high school.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about high school then. So is basically more the same throughout high school, or, I mean, I'm just trying to better understand kind of like when you weigh it all up, right? You get the 4 boys in the same house, and I know all of your brothers, and I can kind of imagine how you were the quiet one and reading books. And so you're probably, for the most part left alone from your parents' point of view, in the sense of like, well, you were the good kid, you weren't getting in trouble or being loud or whatever. And
squeaky
I guess
wheel
that's kind
gets
of a double-edged
grease.
sword, right? Because you were being good, you weren't like doing the wrong thing, but you were also, I guess, I don't know if neglect is the right word, but just like, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So if the louder brothers are getting more attention, did that like cause you to act out in high school at all, or was it just kind of more the same?
No, so I never was one to act out because, again, when I was reading books when I was younger, I realized that acting out was just a behavioral issue that was somebody seeking attention, right? Whether it was negative attention, it's still attention, and the body craves it subliminally one way or the other, or subconsciously, right? So I knew that if I was going to continue to learn and grow mentally, one of the things I had to immediately hedge out was that. And so I did that from a very early age. But being highly observative, I always observed my brother's behaviors and how much they got in trouble. And it just made me I learned vicariously. Like, I love learning vicariously. If I can learn from somebody else who spent decades or years in suffering because of what they've done, I'm totally going to do it because it's so much more efficient and easier. But yeah, I don't know. Sorry, what was the question? Let's get back on
Just
track.
like,
here.
was high school any different, or was it basically still kind of the same?
No, high school was the same, except that it just presented new problems. There was always constantly some kind of new issue with the family or with the brothers. Drinking, drugs for some of my brothers, like recreational based drugs, like marijuana, stuff like that. Yeah, those kind of things spurred up. And, me being a problem solver, I always tried to be their psychologist and, help fix them. But
I'm sure they loved that.
Oh God, they hated it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that must have created a little bit of a rift.
Yeah. I really poured myself into cars and groups, like group friends, like my car friends and stuff like that, because I just kind of found a community in my peers, right?
Yeah.
I was very peer oriented in high school. So yeah, there were some changes for sure.
Yeah. And so I know, I don't want to like give away the story, but I know you had a bad accident. Was that in high school or was that post high school?
It was. Okay.
So let's talk about that, because I know, just knowing you, that was a pretty defining moment for you. And I guess, can you set the stage a little bit, like, where were you mentally and spiritually prior to that event?
Yes.
And then what were the so what of after that?
Yeah. So very science oriented. I was agnostic going into, my parents and grandparents went to church on holidays, basically. At least that's what I remember. I'm sure they went more, but I don't know how to say it other than they weren't on fire for the Lord, like as I thought, so yeah, so I was agnostic. I knew that there was a God. I had that foundation there. I believed, like, I read the stories and I believed the stories, but it like never really clicked, if that makes sense. So like, I was testing God, and this is part of my testimony. I guess we can go ahead and just jump into the testimony if that's all right. So I was testing God, being bold, stupid, ignorant, right? That's what all ignorant non-believers do. And I said, God, if you're real, show me. Show me. If you're real, show me. And I remember saying that as I was driving by the new church. And the church just had a light up ceremony that night. And they literally lit it up like as I was driving by. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. And so I just kept testing him. And I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days later, I'm coming down that same road. And I had just a really eerie gut feeling, like something wrong was going to happen. And I prefaced that to say that, I've had a dream that I was going to have a really, really bad accident. And I told my mom years and years in advance that, hey, I'm going to have a really, really bad accident, but it's okay. I'm going to be okay. I lived through it. So that being said, I'm driving down. I'm getting that eerie feeling. I look over at my buddy Chris, who's in the passenger seat. I said, Chris, get your seatbelt on. He said, no, I'm not wearing my seatbelt. I said, you're going to wear your seatbelt or I'm going to pull over. And mind you, this guy's like, he's probably 240, 250, 6'5", big boy. Like,
beat you up.
He's the enforcer kind, right? And so
yeah.
I'm standing up against him because I just know something's going to happen, right? So he buckles his belt, and about 5 seconds later, we top the hill, and I see a drunk driver in my lane heading straight for my vehicle. Adrenaline kicks in. I brace myself on the wheel, and my muscles don't give out, but my bones do. So I shatter my right arm from my elbow down in about 300 pieces, and I shattered my left hand because I pushed my steering wheel through my speedometer. And I remember ending up beside him facing the same way because he had flipped us. He hit us so hard. There was ripples down the car and all this stuff. It was wild. Snapped the side mirrors completely off the car. And engine was starting to come through the firewall and everything. It was wild. Seatbelt saved Chris's life. I remember looking up at this guy, and he's sitting there smiling, laughing because he's so drunk. He doesn't even realize what he's done. He thought it was a fun ride. And I look down and I realize I'm not dying. And then as soon as I look up and it's that cross that's lit up. And I just hear God in my head, like your conscience would say to you, I could have put you in hell tonight, but I spared you. And man, I was 16. I shouldn't even be here. I should have been dead when I was 16. Straight up. And God spared me. He was merciful, and he gave me grace that I didn't deserve as usual. And I said, okay, I hear you loud and clear. So I get out of the hospital, and I said, one of the things I prayed was, please just help me get to that church. That was my prayer at that time. And so I get healed, and I get home, and I'm recovering. And my brothers come home, and they bring two girls to the front door of my parents' house. It was Jennifer and Summer. And I'll never forget it. That voice popped up in my head again and said, you're going to marry one of those girls. And I looked over at my mom, and I said, Mom, I'm telling you, this is wild. I don't know why this is happening, but I feel like God's telling me I'm going to marry one of these girls, and I just want you to know that ahead of time. She laughed.
And she's
They're just being silly. Sure. They're just pretty girls.
You're still on your pain meds or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Just brushing it off. And so Summer introduces herself to me, and immediately we click. I know it's her. And she introduced herself. She says, I know this is super strange, but God's putting it on my heart to ask you to come to church with me. Buddy, ain't nothing else in this world going to convince me that God's not real after that. Yeah. I mean, at that point, it was like, okay, 100% loud and clear. I read you. And so I said, yes. And turns out to be the exact church. She had gone to that church her whole life. She had been going to Harrisburg Baptist Church her whole life. And so I remember praying a little bit more. I started praying after that because I wasn't stupid. And I just felt like my prayer was, God, I need you to reveal yourself to me and teach me what I need to do, right? I need to move forward with you. Because I don't want this to stay stagnant, right? That was kind of my thought process. And
yeah.
So I go to church with Summer, and Brother David is preaching that weekend. He's the associate pastor, and it just so happens he's preaching, and Brother Forrest is probably preaching 95% of the time. So I landed him my first time to church. So I'm listening to what he's saying, and I'm telling you, man, it's like God was speaking directly through that man to me. Like he was just using him as a microphone. I can literally see God just laughing, like, I got him. Right?
Told you.
Yeah. Like, and so he's speaking so much to me that I'm just weeping in the middle of a sermon, just a normal sermon. Everybody else is like, what is going on with that kid? Right. And I'm just weeping to the point where I get up and I'm starting to walk out of the main hall, and some men come out there, and, they counsel me, and I tell them what's going on in the whole situation, and prayed the sinner's prayer, and started, I just remember being on fire that week. Like my whole world was just completely different. Super excited, super happy, joy, not happiness, joy. Because there's a very big distinction between the two. And
sorry to interrupt you, but
sure.
Let's define, in Brandon's words, what's the difference between happiness and joy?
Happiness is something we seek, and joy is something we receive. And the only way we can receive true joy is through Jesus. And he is the only source of joy. And I call it, C.S. Lewis calls it the God-shaped hole in our heart, right? Mm-hmm. So God makes us to have a void that only he can fill.
Yep. And
that's so that we have the free will, and hopefully with that void, we choose to love him and pursue him. And so that's joy. And I just remember having this exuberant amount of overflowing joy. Like you could knock me in my face and I would still be smiling, like just for weeks and weeks. And so I really worked on maturity and all that stuff. And what's so funny is Brother David is the one who baptized me and married me and all that stuff. So he had a huge part in my upcoming, in my Christian maturity. But yeah, and he ended up being my Sunday school teacher for a couple of years. So yeah, but that's my testimony, man. It's a wild thing, but it's an incredible thing. I'm very blessed. Like I said, I shouldn't even be here, and yet I'm sitting here enjoying blessings because of him.
Yeah. So, we can go back to one thing too.
Sure.
You said you had this dream that you were going to be in a bad accident at some point. Mm-hmm. How old were you when that happened?
Roughly 10, maybe 10 or 11.
This is years in advance of it happening. And can you just describe that dream a little bit?
So it's not like a deja vu or like a normal dream. It was just different. It was more vivid. And the only way I can express it is like the difference between looking at through a VR goggle and actually looking at real life. Does that make sense? Like you can tell there's a difference, right? No matter how good the VR is, you're wearing something, right? There's a difference. So, and there was another,
but it was like
that.
It was vivid enough though that like it wasn't. I'm just trying to unpack it, right? It's such an abstract thing to try and put into words virtually or just listening to, but.
So my whole life I've had dreams like that. And I know when they're those dreams because I've had so many of them. And so like one of the things that I knew was that my wife would have a birthmark on her left inner calf. I just knew that. And sure enough, when I had just happened chance in college, I was talking about it with Summer, and she's like, no way. And so she showed me the birthmark on her calf, and I'm like, and then there was another time where she was coming out of the student union at Ole Miss, coming down the stairs, and I didn't know if it was her or not, but I knew that my wife was coming down the stairs, and when it actually happened, I realized it was her, and I knew I was going to marry her at that point. So I started ring shopping and all that stuff. So yeah, I've had dreams like that, and I don't know why. I just do, and I believe God gives me some insight before it happens so that I can be prepared. I mean, that's the best way I can put that. So.
What's the last premonition that you've had, Brandon?
Christ returning. I saw, and this is kind of crazy. I know this is going to like go loony town for most people, but like I literally saw mayhem. I was standing outside of like a major supermarket, and there was just absolute mayhem in the parking lot. And then I saw a bright light through the clouds, and I saw Jesus coming through them. And I just remember falling on my knees and waking up. And that's the last one I had. But whether that one comes true or not, we don't know. No man knows the hour of the day, right? So,
right. Thief in the night.
A Black Friday sale may trigger the apocalypse.
Yeah, you had a dream about Black Friday.
Hey, look, I would love to go up like Eli did. That's all I can say about that.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, yep.
But,
okay, so you had this, for lack of a better term, defining moment. This pivotal moment, physically, mentally, spiritually, from this car accident, and then feeling like God tugging on your heart and saying, "Look, I could have. You're lucky to be here right now." So how then was your life different?
Oh man,
in two ways. I want to ask this in two ways. One, in the way that you approached development as a man, and then development of your soul, because I think they're two very different things, right?
Yeah.
And especially being so introverted and kind of being like the one who kind of just read books and learned on his own and solved his own problems. Did any of that change after this event, moving forward into like graduating high school, going to college? How is Brandon different?
Yeah, so obviously sanctification played a huge role in that. Like if I was looking back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I can see points where like I quit drinking, I quit cussing, I quit being around and socially smoking with people, like cigarettes and stuff, and doing stupid stuff like game addiction. Like I cut back on that, and like I had a lot of smaller things. I never did hard drugs. I never did stupid things like just go out and randomly do stupid stuff, right? I wasn't one of those people. Like, so there wasn't a lot really to fix there, but there was spiritually. There was a lot spiritually to fix. And so, in fact, I was trying to mature on my own, and I struggled for probably 5 years. And then I eventually, because of the people I hung out with, previous friendships and people around me, I actually kind of backslid and stagnated for a couple of years. And eventually some hardships hit me, and it drew me closer to God again. Suffering is one of the most necessary things that's ever happened in my life. Like, good. I'm glad I'm suffering. I hate it at the time, but all discipline at the time seems terrible, right? But like every time I'm suffering, it's a beautiful negative to me because I'm growing in some way. Mm-hmm. I am becoming stronger in some way.
Can you talk about that stagnation some more and like where? Yeah. Actually, let's go back a little bit further before you do that. Talk about, okay, so you met Summer in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about how that relationship grew through college, and then did the stagnation come before you were married, or is that after you'd been married?
Before, and the stagnation and the troubles that Summer and I actually had were in college time, just because, again, I isolated. And during my stagnation period, I was heavily addicted to gaming, like 12, 13 hours a day, like bad, right? Failed out of college at one semester. Wow. So that was kind of the epical event that told me, hey, buddy, you can't sleep through these classes like you did in high school and make straight A's. You have to actually try here. And so, yeah, that was it's a definite period of growth for me and suffering. But Summer and I actually took a break because I didn't know what I wanted. That was the point in time where I realized that I was kind of having an existential crisis, right? Like I was starting to actually get into the depth of things I never dug into, like my traumas and, my things that I was struggling with. And I started reading things like Nietzsche and Carl Jung and Maps of Meaning by Dr. Jordan Peterson. Like I was a Peterson fan well before he got famous. Like I literally followed the man's work 10, 15 years before he ever got famous. But like I started reading his stuff and the introspective thinking just went in overdrive. C.S. Lewis, those kind of things. And so I didn't know what I wanted. And I never asked myself what I wanted. That was the biggest issue. I always was a people pleaser, and I was always stuck in a performance trap. Even spiritually, I was in a performance trap. So my idea back then as an immature Christian of what a good Christian is somebody who follows all the commandments and does what he's supposed to do as a good boy, and that's going to get me into heaven. And I didn't have the mature understanding that, yes, repentance is required and necessary, but no amount of work I do is going to make my vile, wretched heart worthy of Christ or God. And so there was a lot of comeuppance in that time because I had to realize there were things in me that I had to root out that were going to be painful. And I didn't want people around to suffer with me because I'd kind of externalize it, right? I'd project it. And so, especially with my attachment type. So I had to work through a lot of things in college, and I learned how to learn. So a lot of things were just really easy all the way up until that point. And then this was the first time I actually had challenges where I had to actually learn. And it was super frustrating because everything else was just so easy, right? Like it was like somebody handed me the knowledge on a silver platter. Now it's like, no, you got to work for this. Like you get into economics and microeconomics and macro and all these other crazy X bars and all that. I was just, man, this is nightmare stuff for me, man. And so I had to actually study. And so I think the biggest thing was I had to learn to create discipline for myself in my own life. And I had to take a step back and figure out what I needed and prioritize myself even just a little bit. I was still a people pleaser to a vast extent, but I at least brought myself back a little bit.
Okay.
I would say college was a huge, huge time for me.
And then after you graduate, how long until you got married?
So we were going to get engaged while we were in college, but one of the things I did was I always seeked counsel from my papa, my grandfather. Okay. And he's kind of the guy, like if he told you it was going to rain, you brought an umbrella. His words and his thoughts always matched his actions. And so he was the one that even though I didn't get to see him a lot either, he was the one that when I did get to speak with him, there was deep conversation, right? And so when he said, now son, listen, like I was all ears, right? I was just begging for the attention and the knowledge from him because he had the experience-based knowledge, right? And he's just very savvy, charismatic guy with an infectious laugh. And so my grandfather taught me a lot. And one of the things he taught me that actually saved my relationship with Summer was you never let a good thing go, but you never, ever let a great thing go. And when me and Summer were on a break, I just kept remembering that. And that made me realize what I had. And then I asked him, I said, Papa, I want to marry this woman. What do you expect? What do you suggest I do? He says, wait till you're out of college. Because if you do it now and you have kids while you're in college, you're going to struggle. He said, wait till you get out of college, get financially stable, and create a foundation for both your relationship and for your kids' future financially. And after thinking about it, it made perfect sense. And so we got engaged my senior year of college with like maybe a couple months left. And so we got married that next summer when we were both graduated.
What year were you in when you had this conversation with your grandpa or your papa?
2008, 2009.
So you were like a junior or what?
Yeah, it was junior year.
And did you like state your intentions or your desire to Summer at that point and say, hey, look, I don't want to be separated anymore. I don't want to be on a break anymore, but I think we need to wait till this point? Or was it like how did that all unfold? Talk us through that.
Yeah, I knew I was going to marry her.
Okay. Yeah, but did she know that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I told her I was going to marry her. Even when we were teenage kids, we knew we were going to get married. We made a promise to each other, and we loved each other, and so we knew that we were going to marry eventually. And yeah, so
good to have a plan. I like it. So while you were on a break, did you date any other girls? Did you have any other girlfriends while you were before you got married?
So I went on 2 different dates with 2 different girls. Actually, yeah, 2 different dates. Yeah, 2 different girls. But like, man, they just made me want Summer more. Like when I started seeing what other girls were like, it left a sour taste in my mouth, right? Like just emotionally, they weren't present like she was. They weren't as mature as she was. They weren't nurturing. Like, man, I knew like after a couple of dates, it was like, man, I struck it rich with Summer because like, good example. First girl that I took a date with, I actually made her dinner, and I made her like a fresh Grecian salad, all these good things like from scratch, right? She didn't even care. Didn't say thank you. Didn't do it. I said nope. Yeah. So there's a lot of different factors there, but yeah, like I just knew the more I dated somebody, like I couldn't even kiss the other girls. I didn't want to. I just kept thinking about Summer, and so that was the key factor there that told me that Summer was it for sure.
Yeah, you weren't emotionally available. I have a feeling even if they were the most wonderful women on the planet, you wouldn't have cared. Your heart wasn't there. So yeah, and that's
like
great.
There was a couple that were great women, but just couldn't do it. I'm a one girl guy.
So you never had a serious relationship with anyone but Summer.
That's actually correct. Yep.
Yeah. And do you think? Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say I was a virgin, and until Summer and I got married, and yeah. And I was totally okay with that. I was a Tim Tebow.
Yeah. So we're going to get to that later because I just want to kind of like foreshadow for those listening. I think I'll speak for myself. I mean, I used to look at the marriage that you have with Summer and be jealous, right? Because you would describe the way that your marriage was and just the depth of everything that you experienced with her, in confidence in our very tight-knit group here. Be like, man, well, why isn't my marriage like that? Not, and I'm not just talking physically. I'm talking every aspect of marriage. But that's got to be a humongous factor. Why, right? And that's very unpopular in the age we live in. Right? Yeah. It's very counterculture. But having kind of lived in both worlds, living the opposite of what you've just described, but seeing what you've had, yeah, I think you probably had it right. And. So I want to unpack that with you, but okay. So Dustin, I just want to pause in case you had any follow-ups to kind of the relationship stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like marry early and marry well, right? Is I think what you did, Brandon, which is, I mean, congratulations to you. There's not a lot of men that can say that they did what you did. How would you push back against our popular culture that would say that you missed out, that you didn't play the field enough to really meet the right person, that you didn't date enough women to kind of sow your oats and experience the world? How would you respond to that?
Man, there's not a bigger blessing in the world than a woman that's worth a lifetime. And when you're on your deathbed, which I've thought I've been on a couple of times, and the only thing that you want when you're dying is her. One night stands and 5 minutes with somebody else doesn't mean jack diddly in this world. It's just like any, at that point, you're treating a woman as a materialistic object. It's just like driving a fast car. There's no substance there. Like, I knew from the minute I was a kid that I was looking for the one. I wasn't looking for a cheap date or a fun time, ever. Like, it was never that for me. It was always wanting the forever girl. And like, I got rejected a lot growing up, and people saw me as clingy, but I just was serious. Like, I just knew what I wanted. And so when I found Summer, it was like, wow, this was it, right?
That's beautiful. I love to hear that. So what advice would you give to young men who are on Tinder, who are swiping left and right? What does that do to their brain? And what is the solution to a world where you have 1,000 beautiful options and it's hard to choose the right one?
I would say that it's really easy to find a pretty girl on the outside, but it's really tough to find one that's beautiful on the inside, especially now with the generations that have come up. You know, unfortunately, a lot of women live in a fairy tale, unrealistic reality. They think that Prince Charming is X, this, and this, and they have these high standards and double standards. And my best advice for you is to find a woman who seeks the Lord. Because if she's really turning to the Word, she's going to be natural. And I'm not talking about feminist movement feminine. I'm talking about truly feminine. Like a beautiful, nurturing, loving woman who will be loyal to the day she dies. That's the kind of love you need to be looking for. And there's a lot of qualities for that. But the most important thing as a man that he should be worrying about, if he's a young man, is being worthy of that love. Because even if he finds it, if he's not worthy of it, he'll never get it.
Yeah, she'll pass him over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, let's fast forward then. So you
Sure.
graduate college, you're engaged, you get married. You know, when did you get married? And then talk about kind of like starting out together as a married couple. And,
Sure.
You are the only serious relationship that either one of you has had. You know, so talk through what it was like.
It was
starting life
bliss.
together.
Without kids, the first 5 years. So I was a big Dave Ramsey guy in college. When I drove from my job, I had a full-time job on top of school to support myself. And I would always just listen to Dave Ramsey religiously. And one of the things Dave always said was have a plan and implement it as soon as possible. And he had the baby steps program, right? So I did the Total Money Makeover. And when Summer and I got married, the first conversation we had was, what's mine is yours, yours is mine. We are one flesh. We are a team. It's us against the world, not me versus you or me versus the world and you. We're a team. We're doing this together. All finances are together. There's no hidden accounts. There's no free accounts to do whatever we want with. Everything is in one place, and we figure out foundationally what we want to spend, how we want to spend it, and then we stick to that. And we both had college debt. And so our game plan was 5 years to get debt free, to travel and have fun with each other. And man, we had a blast. We would stay up late every night watching Friends and Golden Girls and I Love Lucy and Andy Griffith and, you know, whatever she wanted to watch or whatever I wanted to watch. And we'd go through these movies and these shows. I'm kind of a big movie buff. And so we would go through them, and some nights we just read next to each other, but we didn't need to be. That's the thing. Like, our relationship has balance. And that's one of the main things I write about in my book, is that our relationship has a healthy balance. We're not codependent. We don't have to be attached at the hip. We're attached at the heart, which means, and that's my phrase that I put in the book, is that we are attached at the heart, not at the hip. And it's because we can be around each other, doing our own hobbies and just being, we know that we love each other. We're comfortable in our own skin around each other, right? And we're comfortable that our relationship's not going anywhere. And I'm not saying to neglect the time that you have together. I'm just saying, don't be a level 5 clinger, right? I mean, that's the best way to put it, right? Like, you can't be so codependent. Don't be dependent on your spouse for your happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
be able to have happiness by yourself and with your wife, and have a balance between the two.
So, quick question, Brandon, who's your favorite golden girl?
The granny. What's the granny's name? I'm drawing a blank now. Oh no,
Madge, or I forget. I know you're talking about she's so cranky. She's the best.
But she's the wittiest one out of all of them.
Yeah.
And her daughter always gives her grief, and she gives it right back to her. And she's so funny, and she makes fun of the other ones. So, yeah. I would say her.
I'm a Betty White guy. Bless her heart.
Oh, Betty White was amazing.
Rest in peace.
Yeah. But no, what were we talking about? I'm sorry, I got sidetracked there with the Betty White stuff.
Yeah, well, I'll ask a question then. So you're saying, be attached at the heart, not at the hip.
Yes.
Can you highlight a little bit what that looks like?
Yes. So we were talking about our first 5 years, right? So we did a lot of spontaneous things too. Can I just mention that real quick? Because I bought a convertible right out of college. We got debt free. We paid off all of our cars. We paid off all of our college debts within 2 years. We did it 3 years ahead of time. And then we went and bought a house and tried to put as much as we could towards the end. We were literally debt free minus our house. So when we decided to have kids, we had no financial strain whatsoever. And we haven't ever since. Mm-hmm. So that was a very important factor, because Dave always talked about financial stress putting huge pressure on marriages.
Yeah.
So it was really important for us to go into our marriage and keep our marriage healthy financially, right?
Yeah, and I want to back up a little bit too and talk about a little bit like headship and stuff. So were you, were you at a point where you felt that you were leading it was just the two of you for the time being, but were you, especially when you talk about like not being codependent, things like that. So you had a plan, you were casting vision, yes, no, or was that still an area that like you needed to grow?
So I've always had a 5-year and a 10-year plan for everything in my life.
Okay.
And when
so you were leading well as her husband very early.
But it was kind of
that responsibility.
Right. But it wasn't like a active conscious thing for me. It was just more of I'm a very planned out person. She is too. And we wanted to plan together. Right. And so I think it was a little bit of biblical wisdom mixed with just my own type A personality. Right. And so I wanted a long-term and a short-term and a medium-term goal. And that was both in career, in my sex life, in my marriage, kids, personal growth. There was a lot of things, right? And so obviously the first 5 years, we just wanted to enjoy us in sex life, right? I mean, that's kids red light, green light it all the time, man. That's a tough thing, And so we knew we wanted to enjoy it, right? And so being a perfectly natural thing, we just, man, I'll never forget it. Bought the convertible, called Summer up on the way home from a rough day at work on a Friday and said, pack your bag. I'm not telling you where we're going, but we're going somewhere. And we went to the beach for like 3 or 4 days and had an amazing time. Like it was like the honeymoons after the honeymoon.
Yeah.
Like we tried to take as many trips, even if they were just small. And it didn't matter how far we drove, but we had a blast and we spent time together and we cultivated a relationship that we knew would be worthy of being seen by our kids. Mm-hmm. And so 3 or 4 years in, we started praying about kids, and we both just knew it was going to be 2 kids, a boy and a girl. And that's exactly what we got. And so after that, we were like, okay, we're done. And, I went and got the snip, wore the cone of shame for 3 days kind of deal, but, I mean, that's all she wrote for that. I mean, we had a plan, we implemented it. And it made things so much easier.
What do you think you did differently that so many men seem to get wrong? And like, I mean, we just did my story recently, right? So like, you can compare and contrast off me if you want, but why were the two of you able to basically hit the ground running in a way that so many seem to struggle with? You didn't have this period. Like, I mean, let's go back to what Dr. Willard Harley said, right? Year 2 is usually the hardest year for most marriages. The honeymoon phase wears off. All the reality sets in. You guys didn't really seem to have that, right? So what were kind of, let's start with some tactical things and then maybe some more higher level things like spirituality and things like that. I'm not, because your story is not normal, right? I
No,
think most people
definitely
hear that
not.
and go, wow, that's crazy. And so what can people learn from what you did?
Yeah. Our relationship was just so naturally harmonious because the temptation to be selfish was always squashed. Like, I wanted to go do something, but it's like, is that best for me and Summer? No. Then I need to put that behind me for a little while and find a better time to do it. And I think a lot of the things that people struggle with in relationships is selfishness. Because think about it. When you argue and you fight and you call your wife a bad name and you dig at her, why are you doing it? Selfish. You're hurt, so you want somebody else to hurt, right? Selfishness. Or, hey, I want to go do this and I don't care what you do. That's selfish. Buddy, if I'm going to the refrigerator to get a glass of water, guess what I do? Grab my wife a glass of water and bring it back to her. Again, one flesh. We have to both be equal and we have to take care of each other. And so it's just little things every day that build up. So I would say the first thing to do is start with small victories. Make your wife a cup of coffee every morning. Cook her breakfast every morning. Don't ever miss it. Or pray for her every day. Let her see it. Pray with her. Do Bible studies together. Hell, you want to have some fun? Do Bible studies naked. Argue naked. Don't ever go to sleep pissed off.
I don't think the argument lasts very long at that point.
No, right? So like little things, just have little victories. And then when the guard's down and you guys learn to love and to talk to each other with emotional regulation and emotional intelligence, and stop letting your pride and your defense mechanisms go up, and you be vulnerable to each other like you were when you first started dating because you wanted them, then you can start working things out, right?
Yeah, so keep the pursuit going.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think it's all too common. Like you get married and think, oh well, we're married now. Like I don't have to try anymore. It's like, no, you should try twice as hard.
Yep. And you should
be twice as intentional about everything you do. It seems like both of you were fully invested in not just, oh, we're married now and life is normal, but you kept pouring into the relationship. Which I think a lot of people are still relatively successful at doing prior to kids.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, okay, so you became a father and she became a mother. Talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like the first time you became a dad, and then any impacts that had on your relationship and how you continue to keep kind of building momentum as opposed to letting it set you back.
Yeah, so our marriage never struggled until we actually had kids. And I think one of the root causes of that was because, again, selfishness came up. And the selfishness was this time that I don't get the time that I had devoted to my wife all the time. I didn't get to prioritize her as much as I wanted to anymore. And I also had to die to a lot of other personal self-hobbies and different things that I enjoyed, right? So there was a lot of things that had to be rooted out that sucked, put it lightly. But
like what, if you're willing to share?
Sure, like gaming. Like I was a huge avid gamer and I loved gaming. I was streaming. I was doing a lot of stuff online. Had a big community built up and a bunch of subscribers and different things. And I was editing 40 hours a week because it was my passion, right? And cars. I love modifying cars and building cars, and I was building my Z up, and like every month I was buying specific parts and really I was earning extra to put those parts. But after a kid, I can't do that. Like I had to put a lot of that stuff away, and that to go from having this super comfortable life of whatever I want whenever I want it to I've got some priorities that I have to put ahead of those things now was tough. And that was also the time that I had a job that it wasn't hell, but it had a great view of it. So for me, it was just like I had a really terrible boss that just externalized a lot of his own personal issues and like took it out on a lot of people. And I was one of the punching bags, unfortunately. So just a really, really bad soul sucking job. And it wasn't what I expected because I think I was at the point in my life where I realized I was at the point of no return with doing the grandiose dreams that I had in my mind. Some of my dreams were dying. And that was a real struggle for me. So I faced a lot of heavy depression and anxiety because I was just going to be I felt like I was going to be stuck in the 9-to-5 cube farm for the rest of my life. And
Gotcha.
that was spooky for me. But I knew I had to provide for my kids at any cost and provide stability. And I wanted to maintain the stability that we built years before them. And so I just bit my lip and bared it, right? I just kept doing it, but I prayed to God, prepare me for whatever's in my future. And boy, did he. So.
Did any of your, I don't know if trauma is the right word, but just in the way that you were raised, did any of those challenges present themselves in this moment where you're a dad now and the temptation to be selfish, which I gotta believe every dad listening to this can relate to that feeling of, oh, I can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. But how exactly did your past play a role in your present at the time as a new dad and husband?
Yeah.
And I guess kind of what are the takeaways from that, words of caution and that kind of thing?
Yeah, again, it was isolation. Kids crying at 3 a.m. from colic. We probably averaged 3 hours of sleep a night for 6 months because of his colic. And those were broken up hours. So it was 1 hour here, 1 hour there, 1 hour there, and then I'd go to work. And escapism was like my biggest thing. That was my main priority for the first year, just survival mode and escapism, like escaping from him, escaping from my wife. And it was the worst thing I could have possibly done, but didn't have a choice. I was in survival mode and I had to provide, right? I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then I realized what I was doing and I knew I had to change that. That was my epical moment for myself as a man and as a leader in my house. Like that was the turning point for me where I realized, like, I'll tell you an example. It's 3 a.m. He's scream crying in my ear and I'm crying as well because I'm just emotional and I'm tired. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. And I told Summer, I need you to go get him because I just left him in his crib. I couldn't be around him. And I literally at 2 a.m. in the morning walked out my front door and I walked for about 2.5 miles before I came back home. And I was at my wit's end and went to the doctor, tried to get on some medicine for it. Didn't. It made it way worse, way worse. And I'll never forget it. Dr. Jones said, Brandon, you just need to go to the gym every day, no matter what you're doing. And you need to eat healthier. And he said, you do that for 3 weeks and it'll help. And I'll never forget it. Day 20, day 21, clouds started parting finally. And I started diving back into the Word. And I sought counsel from my pastor because I didn't have a support. I didn't have any support. Nobody came and helped us with this baby except for a couple of Summer's friends. And so, and what, if I'm being 100% transparent, honest, because my mom's back, she couldn't come. And so like my dad being gone all the time, my own parents weren't here to help us with our kid. My grandparents live here. They didn't help. They couldn't. They had their own lives, right? And
did you ask?
There were a couple of times we did, but after a while, you feel like it's excuses and you give up.
Okay.
And you just realize you got to tough it out on your own. So I went to the pastor, just in a really bad spot. And I'll never forget it. He read me Matthew talking about the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and how they don't reap or sow, and yet God takes care of them. Surely he would take care of somebody he loves so much more, right? And I just remember this overwhelming sense of relief washing over me, like, Brandon, you stupid idiot. You lost sight, man. You lost sight because of the hardship. And yeah.
So, earlier in this exact same episode, you talked about how when you were younger, you had to retreat to solitude and solve your own problems. And so do you think you were just reverting to kind of like your own conditioning in that moment? And this, having that conversation with your pastor was kind of like the renewing of your mind in a sense to be like,
yes,
okay, it worked when I was a kid. This isn't the time for that anymore.
I was 100% double-minded.
Okay.
Double-minded because I was viewing things in a worldly view instead of a Christian view. And I was also just physically and mentally and emotionally just not placing myself with the right priorities, not placing myself with self-care or anything. I wasn't doing anything that I should have been doing, that I always had been doing. And then on top of that, I was isolating because that's my natural defensive response. And so it's like it just compounded, right? And so reaching out to my pastor was kind of my courageous act of, I've hit rock bottom. I have nowhere else to go. I have to get out of this, or I'm just not going to survive, right? And so this was my last ditch effort, and it was one of the best things I ever did. Again, Brother David, saving my life, man.
That's amazing.
And you also, I mean, to all the dads out there, we all have that moment. I know I have. You did the right thing walking away, Brandon, because in that moment, you might do something you regret to your child, you know? Yeah. So when you know you're in that place, you have to walk away and leave your kid in the crib and let him cry. You got to, you know, we are all men, we're flawed. And when you know that you are at your breaking point, you have to, you know, ask for help and make sure that you don't do anything you regret. So you did the right thing there. That was not, was not a weakness at all.
My escapism was so great at that time that I literally almost bought a ticket to Japan and just got on the plane and never came back. I literally almost got on a plane and went to another country. I have no idea how to speak their language and just would have left. Like, I was at that point. That's how low I was. I remember that vivid thought process and thinking, that is the crappiest thing. I will never do it. But it was still a thought in my head. It was ideation, right? And that was part of the depression and the other stuff. And I clearly knew that, but like, there was a lot of shame and guilt behind that feeling and that thought process. And so I had to learn to give myself some grace that, hey, look, you're just under a lot of pressure and you got to start checking the right boxes and stop checking these wrong ones. Right. And so that was where the real transformational journey began for me as a man. So again, I started diving into Jordan Peterson's stuff and just really, really working on myself. I started hitting the gym and eating healthy and, you know, having foundational conversations with my wife. And that's one of the two things I meant to say, rolling back now that I've thought about it, was you have to set a foundation with your wife on what you're going to do day to day, because if there's something that you don't like to do that she doesn't mind doing and you're doing it anyways, you're building up bitterness against your partner.
Yeah. Yep.
And so when we first got married, we had to set up those foundational things. Like, I don't mind taking out the trash, do some curls while you're doing it, you know? Yeah, it's cool. Hate laundry. Hate it. She doesn't mind it. So she does the laundry. I do the trash and the recycling and all that stuff. And I do the finances. And, you know, we found out what works for what, and we negotiated and we set a foundation. And then the second thing is we had to, and especially during this turmoil time, so we had to set aside, I don't know, at least a solid 5 to 6 hours a week where we talked and we kept up to speed with each other. How are you doing? Do you want me to listen or do you want me to help you solve it? What can we do to attack this? What can we do to fix this? Like, we had to have meetings, family meetings together, and we had to create time to keep maintenance for our marriage. Because in survival mode, it's so easy to drop back to solo mode. You know, you're just a robot doing the thing every day. I'm just going to fix things, like, because you get bad enough and that hierarchy of needs, you're just going to try to fix things for yourself. And excuse my French, but to hell with everybody else, right? And so you have to stuff that by fixing things with your wife, not away from her. Have her help. So she sees where you're at. She knows what you're feeling. And then she can, you know, support you. And if she's not supporting you, man, she's got a lot of things to work for herself as well with the Lord. Because, man.
Well, it's also like, it's so tempting, like, especially when you're tired and fatigued, right?
Yeah.
It's so tempting to think about your own needs only. And your wife is just as tired and just as worn out when you're raising a brand new baby, right? Like, you're both in that state. And so to kind of gut punch yourself and force yourself to think outside of yourself and like, oh, you know, she's worn out too. Like, we're both not at 100% here. Also helps just pump the brakes on that self-serving kind of spiral that we can get down.
Right.
And I say this as a guy who failed at this miserably when I had a newborn. So not from an air of superiority, but just driving that point home. And I think this is where isolation was your risk too, right? Because you didn't have other men in your life be like, hey, dude, look, I know you're in the thick of it, but this is what's going on. Dump to me and then go show up for your wife. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have that either.
Yeah,
and so then
I never had
the
that.
temptation to butt heads is significantly higher, right? So I'll let you respond to that, but I do want to get going forward in the next couple of minutes to the birth of your daughter.
Growing up, my whole life, I never had, hey, you should do this. This will help you with this. Or here's your game plan of attack for this. So I had to figure it all out vicariously or by myself. And so, again, I was reverting, and I don't say if your wife doesn't support you, then she's got a lot of work to do herself, without saying that you've got to do it yourself too. Like, it's both sides. It's not just her. And so, like, that's why I encourage people to do it together, because you've got to work on you and she's got to work on her, and you got to do it together. Because if you don't, then you're just surviving without each other and your roommates. Right? And that's not a marriage. That's a financial agreement with a baby and a whole lot of complications. You got to love one another and support each other.
And you both start to feel loneliness really quick.
And that selflessness has to be there, even if you feel like, I'll never forget it. He threw up on my shoulder. I probably had about 2 hours of sleep, and I had pulled about a 14-hour work day. He was running a fever. He was super sick. And Summer said, I need a bath because I feel disgusting. And like, my initial instinct was like, I need him off me with this throw up, right? But I was like, honey, go take your bath. I'll take care of this. So I literally shouldered the vomit and the whole thing with Ben, because I knew she needed a minute too. And so, again, yeah, you're 100% right on that. You have to think selflessly and not selfishly. Again, selfishness is the root of most issues in a marriage. So if you're seeing issues in your marriage, start with yourself. I know that's a tough pill to swallow, and I'm sorry that may be blunt, but start with the things that you can fix. You can fix you. You can't fix somebody else. They have to fix themselves. You can encourage them. You can help walk them through it, but you have to fix you and they have to fix them. And the more you fix yourself, the more they're going to see it modeled, and the more they're going to want to do it.
Yep. So, especially as the husband, right? You can kind of lead in this manner, like, and not from a, talking down way, but just because it's the best thing to do, and naturally people will follow. So let's fast forward, Brandon. I want to, just before we take a break, I want to get through. So obviously adapting to life as new parents is difficult for everyone. Fast forward a little bit, how your marriage continued forward, and you guys decided to have your second child. And let's get through birth of your daughter and kind of how maybe things were different, what you learned, and then we'll take a break.
Man, so once Ben was a little bit older, things smoothed out. I learned to properly address, and I built coping mechanisms and all the different things to better address my situation. But the more I grew, just 1% a day, the easier it got, until eventually it was just to the point where it's like it wasn't a burden anymore. It was a blessing. And I think, looking back, the only regret I have was how much time and presence I missed being in survival mode with him. So a great example, I was taking pictures of some animals in a park that we had visited that was gorgeous, and I just wanted to relish in the moment. I didn't even take the pictures with the camera. I was I was just looking at them. And Ben asked me, Daddy, why aren't you taking pictures of it? It's right there. And I said, because some things are worth just enjoying in the moment, right? And at that same moment, it's like I had this realization that I didn't do that for a lot of his childhood because I was in survival mode. And I'm not going to do that for my daughter. That's one of the things I did learn through him. And so I grew a lot, and I fixed a lot. And it was very painful. And I did it by myself. but I'm okay with that. And I fought tooth and nail, and then I was praying to God about it, and I just knew it was time for us to have a second kid. And I wanted that girl. I wanted the other one, right? I wanted to see what the variances are and the differences are. And so I was excited. God put excitement in my heart, because after Ben, I was like, whew, as rough as those first few years where I didn't know if we could have a second kid, but man, sure enough, God put it on my heart to have the second kid. And so I discussed it with Summer. She was all on board for it. She wanted baby fever and, all that stuff. And so we have Bela. Other than her almost going into cardiac arrest while having our baby, everything went great. And she came home. She slept through the night. Oh my gosh, that was just so foreign. We thought she was dead, man. Like, I was so scared. I ran to her bed, and she's just sitting there breathing like a little angel. And it was like, wow, okay, we're okay. We're going to get through this, right? We've been through it before. We got a little experience, And so at that point, it was like, okay, I've stepped up. I know what my weaknesses are, but I've got to step up even more. So now it's time to be the leader. Now it's time to really start fixing everything that was generational, so that my children don't have to fight those battles, because the ones I refuse to fight, they end up fighting, and I'm not going to have that. And so we have family meetings. We have a family motto. We keep it fun, but we take care of business, and we address things as we need to. And yeah, man, we grow. I mean, through our mistakes, right? And we grow together. Again, Summer and I grow together. I mean, there's times where, like, I'm like, honey, take a breath. Go take a walk for a second. You're a little heated. And she'll say sorry, and she'll take a walk, and hey, you kind of frustrated Mom right there, and here's why. And, I go through it, and I said, should we do that? Did your conscience, your mind tell you that what you were doing was wrong? Yeah. I said, okay, well, when it does that, don't do it, right? And so we had to teach them and walk them through. But now that they're older and they're more autonomous, man, once you get to those first 5 years or 4 years even, it's so worth it. Everything just starts exploding, right? Like, all the good times, the memories just start happening one after another. And it's perfect, man. I'm at the golden years, right? I know I'm in them, and I'm enjoying them, but like, I can tell I'm in the golden years of my kid's life. And so I'm just trying to be there for them. And I'm not perfect. I screw up all the time, but I'm humble, and I love them, and I love them fiercely enough to tell them, hey, look, Dad screwed up. I'm sorry. And I give them hugs. And one of the things I do is I try to set rituals during specific seasons and on a monthly basis. So like once a month, I'll take each of the kids out, and I'll tell them, we're going to go do something fun. You can pick it. It's kind of a yes day, so to speak. They can say whatever they want, and we'll do it. Yeah. Right. And so like Bela always wants to go get a toy, and she wants to go get some dinner or something. And Ben wants to go to the arcade and play video games. And so we do that. And so they both have their own special time. But yeah, so we got a lot of things we've implemented since the second kid, but I don't know. My marriage has been more on fire now than it ever has. I guess it's that because we've built everything so well, and like we've come so far together. It's like, wow, we got through the hardest part, right? And now it's just enjoying.
Yeah.
So like, dads, my one piece of encouragement for you is, man, just get through the tough years and just enjoy the rest of them, right? Like, work on yourselves, but just know that every like section is just it's a season. It's a chapter in the life, right? And some of them are tough, but some are going to be amazing. And you just have to be hopeful and have faith that it will be.
All right. Well, let's take a break here.
Okay.
All right. That is it for part 1. We will come back for part 2 and finish Brandon's story. In addition to talking about the rest of his story, there will be lots of lessons learned and things that you can take and apply into your life. So we hope you enjoyed this first part of his story. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting us. And we will see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Present Fathers Podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify to catch all of our amazing episodes. We will see you in the next one.